Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for joining us this evening. I know that some families are still logging in, and that's no problem, but we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting at one of our open houses this fall, my name is Katherine Deacon, and I'm the Director of Student Financial Aid here at the University of Hartford, and I'll be presenting this evening on how to navigate the financial aid process. I do want to just mention that this presentation is going to be tailored to undergraduate domestic student financial aid. Of course, we do have opportunities for our graduate students as well as students who are from outside of the US, and we would be happy to schedule an individual appointment with you at a later time to discuss those opportunities. But the majority of this presentation is going to be tailored to our undergraduate domestic students. I'd also just quickly like to mention that we are going to leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A. So we'll answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. You will notice that you have two options to message and speak with myself as the host and our panelists this evening, and that is the chat function as well as the Q&A function. We do just ask that when we get to the Q&A section of the presentation that you only use the Q&A function, as we can keep all of our questions together. And again, we do ask that you hold the questions until that portion of the presentation this evening. I'd like to give my co-host this evening an opportunity to introduce herself, and then I'll let you know who our panelists are that are joining us this evening as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zuli Rodriguez. I am the Associate Director of Student Financial Aid. And lucky for me, Katherine is actually going to be doing the presentation tonight, but I will be answering some of your Q&A questions towards the end of the presentation. So you'll see me pop back in to assist you with those questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuli. We do have two panelists joining us this evening who, much like Zuli, are going to be mostly behind the scenes this evening, but will help to answer some of your questions during the Q&A section. We have Patrice McGregor, who is one of our Assistant Directors of Student Financial Aid, and we have Myra Valverde, also one of our Assistant Directors of Student Financial Aid. And we'll introduce to you later on in the presentation what student populations each of those individuals manage. But again, you'll hear from them throughout the evening as we go through the question and answer section. So just to continue on this evening, I'm going to start with just giving you a brief overview of some of the topics that we're going to discuss. I'm first going to give you a definition and really go in depth on what is financial aid. We'll also discuss the free application for federal student aid, which is the application to apply for need-based financial aid at the university. Talk briefly about how the university uses the free application for federal student aid or the FAFSA form. We'll go into detail about different types of financial aid, how to understand cost of attendance, and then again, of course, at the end, we will save plenty of time for question and answer. So just to get started, what is financial aid? When we talk about financial aid, many times when we're speaking with families, they're automatically thinking about only grants and scholarships, and that's that free money, so money that doesn't have to be repaid upon graduation. Grants and scholarships sometimes come in the form of institutional or state programs. Sometimes they're in the form of federal opportunities through the U.S. Department of Education. But when we're talking about financial aid, we're actually talking about an umbrella term that covers funding provided to students and families in the form of any one of the types of options you see listed on the screen right now. So it's any type of aid that might be given to a family. So sometimes that means grants and scholarships, but sometimes that means loan opportunities. Sometimes that means employment opportunities. So students working on campus and either earning a paycheck or being reimbursed in some way and having funds applied either to tuition or to room and board. So again, it's really an umbrella term that's all encompassing. At the University of Hartford, the Office of Student Financial Aid will counsel families on all four of these options. So we don't necessarily only concentrate on grants and scholarships or the free money, but we will counsel families on going through loan processes, whether they be private loan opportunities or loans that parents are taking out for students. And we also do help students through the employment process. At the University of Hartford, we have many students who are working on campus in many different positions, and our office works with students to help them find jobs as they're going through the financial aid process. When I'm talking about types of financial aid, I always like to break it down into basically two different scenarios. The first, as I mentioned before, is repayment not required. So opportunities in which the student doesn't have to repay funding upon graduation. Usually that's in the form of grants or scholarships. When we talk about grants and scholarships, the way to differentiate the two is that scholarships are generally awarded on the basis of merit or academics or some type of community involvement. And grants are usually awarded on the basis of financial need. So the family demonstrating a financial need and therefore being awarded a grant to assist with that funding, not necessarily on the basis of an academic or community involvement standard. So again, these are funds that don't have to be repaid upon graduation. So when you're looking at a financial aid award letter, whether it be from the University of Hartford or from any other institution, and you see the word scholarship or you see the word grant, that will automatically tell you that those funds do not have to be repaid. When we're talking about employment opportunities, there's a couple of different employment opportunities that I like to share with families. First and foremost, the University of Hartford and many other institutions participate in a federal employment opportunity called the Federal Work Study Program. The Federal Work Study Program essentially allocates funding to students to allow them to work on campus and to earn a paycheck. That money is typically not configured into the student's university bill, meaning it doesn't help to reduce the bill. And so when we counsel families, we generally tell them that federal work study is going to be used to help cover kind of odds and ends expenses. So things like personal expenses, or maybe holding on to the money from semester to semester to cover books, that sort of thing. So again, the student is going to earn a paycheck by working on campus, and the funds are given to the student from the U.S. Department of Education. So again, a really great opportunity. I love to tell the story to families about how I got my start in financial aid, and that is through the Federal Work Study Program. So as an undergraduate student, I worked in the undergraduate admission office on campus at the school that I attended. Thought, you know what, I think I can make a career out of working in higher education. Upon graduation, continued my career in higher ed, and that's sort of how I got my start. So besides it being a really great opportunity to help fund your education, it gives you a lot of really great experience by working on campus and a way to kind of boost your resume as you're going to college. Another program that I'd like to mention to you are resident hall assistance programs. The University of Hartford does have a resident hall assistance program. It is an RA program, as it's commonly referred to. And this particular program is offered through the Office of Residential Life at most campuses and at the University of Hartford. And essentially, an RA program means that the student would work in the residential halls, make sure students are following the policies of the residential halls, help students with roommate conflict and that sort of thing. And in exchange for that work, would be offered the equivalent of free room and board on campus. So again, another really great opportunity for students to work on campus and earn funding to help pay for their educational expenses. And the University of Hartford offers this program again, and many other institutions offer this particular program as well. So all of those opportunities are repayment not required opportunities. When we talk about repayment required opportunities, essentially we're talking about loan opportunities. Loan opportunities can be in the form of a loan that the student is borrowing to help pay for their educational expenses. In some cases, the parent is borrowing the loan on the student's behalf to pay for the educational expenses. As you're going through the loan process, it's really important that you ask a lot of questions, contact the Office of Financial Aid, let us walk you through the loan process, let us explain to you how the process works, ask any questions that you may be feeling nervous about in terms of borrowing loans. In some cases, loans require repayment while the student is in school. In some cases, it doesn't. In some cases, you can defer that repayment until the student graduates. And again, always contact the Office of Student Financial Aid. We're here to help as you go through this loan process. We know it can be a bit of a daunting process, so let us help you. The real first step at the University of Hartford, especially in the financial aid process, is actually going through the admission process. So when a student applies to the University of Hartford and is admitted to the University of Hartford, they are automatically reviewed for academic and talent-based awards. And it is based on a review of all of the admission criteria. So sometimes that's SAT or ACT scores. The University of Hartford is a test optional institution. So it really will be dependent upon whether or not you are going to be submitting those as part of your application. It is always going to be based on your cumulative grade point average from high school. In some cases, it'll be based on your class rank, if your high school does have a class rank for you. If you are applying to our Hartford Art School or the Hart School at the university, your academic or talent award may be based on your audition score or a review of your portfolio for the Hartford Art School. So again, any of the criteria that you're submitting to the university as part of the admission process will be used in terms of determining an amount for an academic or talent award. And you will find out at the time of admission how much you're going to be receiving in the form of that academic or talent award. And again, that is financial aid. So it is scholarship and will be used as part of your overall financial aid package. So the Office of Undergraduate Admission will notify the Office of Student Financial Aid about how much you're receiving, and it will be included as part of your overall financial aid award. So again, the academic and talent award is really step one. Step two is to consider whether or not you'd like to apply for need-based financial aid. The University of Hartford offers need-based financial aid in the form of institutional, so University of Hartford dollars, federal opportunities, as well as state funding opportunities for students from the state of Connecticut. And we participate in all three of these programs, and we will offer a student need-based financial aid based on the results of the free application for federal student aid or the FAFSA form. And I'll go into more detail about the FAFSA form in just a few minutes. Of course, because this is need-based financial aid, the amount that a student might receive in terms of funding is going to vary, and the types of financial aid a student may receive is also going to vary. As I mentioned before, we do participate in the federal work study program. That is actually a need-based financial aid opportunity. So you must complete the FAFSA form in order to be considered for that particular program. In addition to that, though, the university does also participate in two other federal programs that I'd like to just briefly mention to you. One is the Federal Teach Grant Program, which is an opportunity for students who are pursuing education as a major in a high need field as determined by the state of Connecticut, and who commit to teaching in a high need area. Whether that be in the state of Connecticut or in a different state, may be eligible for this particular program. So we would review students for that. And then, of course, we also do participate in the Federal Direct Loan Program, which is a loan program offered through the U.S. Department of Education and gives loans to both students and parents to help fund education for a student. So need-based awards are, there's really a wide array of need-based award opportunities, and the University of Hartford will always review a student for any type of opportunity that they're eligible for based on the results of the FAFSA form. Just to go into some more information regarding the FAFSA form, I've mentioned this a few times this evening, but it stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, free being the key word there. So there is no payment required in order to complete the FAFSA form. At the University of Hartford, it is the only requirement to apply for need-based financial aid. So you just have to go through the admission process and complete the FAFSA form to get a full financial aid award package. At some other institutions, there may be additional applications, but at the University of Hartford, there is nothing else that you need to complete. The FAFSA form is completed online through the secure governmental website, studentaid.gov, and you'll see that listed on the screen now. There is also an opportunity for those of us who always have our smartphones in our hands. There is a My Student Aid mobile app that you can download, and you can complete the FAFSA right through that application as well. So you have two kind of ways that you can complete that, but it's always completed electronically and is always sent to the institutions electronically. So there is no actual paper form to complete. The FAFSA form does collect both demographic and financial information for both the student as well as the parent. Generally speaking, a student who is coming to the university straight out of high school is going to be considered a dependent student and is going to need to provide parental information. Again, both demographic and financial information. The FAFSA form is always going to use the most recently completed tax year at the time of completion. So what that means is for the 2022-2023, so for those of you who are either parents of or you are a senior in high school. It'll be the 2022-2023 FAFSA year when you begin your freshman year, and that is going to use your 2020 tax information. For the 2023-2024 tax year, FAFSA year, it will use your 2021 tax information. So again, it's from 2 years previous. So we understand that sometimes that means that things have changed financially. Always use the correct tax year. Don't take it upon yourself to use a different tax year. Use the correct tax year, and then you can contact our office to discuss, what might be done so that your current information is reflected on the FAFSA form. The FAFSA doesn't take a whole lot of time to complete, usually about a half hour, maybe a little bit longer for your first time. So it's not a huge time commitment in order to go ahead and get that FAFSA form completed. And again, it is an opportunity for us to review you for need-based financial aid opportunities. This is just a quick screenshot of what the FAFSA website looks like at studentaid.gov, and you'll see that I've highlighted the Apply for Aid tab. That's where you'll find a link that says complete the FAFSA form, and that's what you see on the screen right now. In terms of timing of completing the FAFSA form, for those of you who are high school seniors, so for the 2022-2023 academic year, the FAFSA is available now. For those of you who are maybe juniors, for the 2023-2024 academic year, the FAFSA form will be available on October 1st of 2022. So the FAFSA always becomes available for the next academic year on October 1st. Every school is going to have a different deadline in terms of getting the FAFSA completed. It's really going to vary based on whether or not you're applying early decision, early action, whether or not you're going through the rolling admission process. But for the University of Hartford specifically, the FAFSA deadline is always going to be February 15th of the student's senior year. You'll see that I listed on the screen as well the University of Hartford school code, which will be used to complete the FAFSA. So there is a section of the FAFSA where you indicate which schools you'd like the FAFSA form to be sent to. And you will have to include a school code with it. Of course, you can always search for a school code, but we'd like to make it easy for you by giving it to you ahead of time. So you'll see that listed on the screen now. Once the FAFSA is completed, we always say to allow at least 5 to 7 business days to process the FAFSA form. Generally speaking, you'll receive an email from the U.S. Department of Education saying that the FAFSA form has been processed, usually around day 2. But we like to tell students to give schools a little bit of time to get the form electronically loaded into their system before calling to confirm receipt of the FAFSA form. But usually at that 7-day point, you can call and just confirm that the institution has received your FAFSA. The real first step in terms of completing the FAFSA form is creating what we call a federal student aid username and password, or an FSA username and password. So both the student and the parent are going to need to complete this process, just like any other site that you might be using. Most of them require a username and password in order to do anything on the site now. So it's a pretty common process. Every username and password is tied to that particular person's social security number, first name, last name, date of birth, and an email address. So parents are generally quick to use their email address to set up the student's username and password. Please don't do that. Make sure that you are using 2 separate email addresses for both the student and the parent. If you set up the student's username and password with your email address as the parent, then when you go to create yours, you will not be able to, because that email address will have already been taken. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the process. One kind of tidbit that I always tell families is, as you're going through the college search, college application, and financial aid process, the student might want to create a brand new Gmail or Yahoo account to only be used for things like the admission processes, so that your emails don't get kind of mixed in with all of the other emails that we're receiving regularly. So just something to keep in mind. You might want to do that. And then parents, you might be able to have access to that particular email address so that you can follow along as you go through this process. Having a username and password allows parents and students to electronically sign the FAFSA form, which is a requirement of submitting the FAFSA form. I will say that if both parents are married, then only one parent has to have the username and password, so not both parents. So one parent will only need to go through this particular process. The username and password is created through the same website where the FAFSA is completed at studentaid.gov. That's a pretty common theme as you're going through the financial aid process. There's lots of different pieces of the financial aid process completed on that secure governmental website. So just keep that in mind. This is something you can do right now. So it's not something that you necessarily have to wait for. So if we have any juniors joining us this evening, you certainly can go ahead and complete this particular process now. Just make sure that you save the username and password somewhere safe. But also you can wait. It doesn't take a long time to go through this particular process. So it's not a huge time commitment when you're getting ready to sit down to complete the FAFSA next year. As you're going through the FAFSA, you're going to come to a section called the financial information section. It'll be both parent financials as well as student financials. One thing that the U.S. Department of Education has done to make the FAFSA form a bit simpler for families is they've created what's called the data retrieval tool, which allows families to actually pull their tax information directly from the IRS and have it put into all the correct spots on the FAFSA form. This saves time, which is great for families, but also helps to ensure accuracy as you're going through the FAFSA. You know, one thing that those of us who have been in financial aid a long time have noticed is that sometimes families accidentally add a zero to their income, and you can imagine what that might look like if your family added a zero to their income as you're going through a need-based financial aid process. So again, it just makes sure that everything is accurate. So as you're going through the FAFSA, there will be kind of a small series of questions that will be asked. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you what that looks like. And then you'll be prompted to link to the IRS. Once you link to the IRS, you'll put in some basic tax information like your address that's listed on your federal tax forms, that sort of thing. As long as you do all of that correctly, you'll be able to pull your tax information and have it put right into the FAFSA form, which again is a great option. It also helps to save time as you're going through the aid process once you've committed to an institution, meaning it is unlikely that you'll have to provide any additional documentation to the institutions if you go through the data retrieval tool process. So again, really an important piece of the process that I want to let you know about and hope that you would take advantage of as you're going through the FAFSA form. So on the screen right now is just, I know it might be a little blurry, so I do apologize, but this is the section. I'm under the student financials section on this particular slide, but you'll see that it just asks, you know, have you completed an IRS tax return? If so, what type of form did you complete and what was your tax filing status? Based on these three questions, they will determine eligibility to link to the IRS and use that IRS data retrieval tool. And you'll see I've highlighted in red at the bottom the link to the IRS link, which again redirects you over to the IRS where you'll input some additional information. As long as that information is accurate and they're able to locate you, you'll be able to pull your tax information directly into the FAFSA form. So again, saves time and really ensures accuracy as you're going through this process so that you don't have to feel overwhelmed at all by the process and by going through the financial information section. I mentioned earlier that only one parent needs to have the FSA username and password in order to electronically sign the FAFSA form. So I'd like to just briefly talk about which parent that should be based on many different family circumstances. So first and foremost, if both a biological mom and biological dad are married, then the student would include both parents in terms of their demographic and financial information, but only one of those parents would need the FSA username and password. And it would, of course, be up to the family to decide which parent that would be. If biological mom and biological dad are divorced or separated, meaning living in separate dwellings, then the student would include on the FAFSA form only the parent that the student lives with more than 50% of the time. And now many times families come back to us and say, well, it's 50-50. to that, we say there's 365 days in a year. So there's got to be one parent that is providing slightly more of the student's support, and it should be that particular parent that would be included on the FAFSA form. Now, whatever parent in that situation that is required to be included on the FAFSA form from both a demographic and financial information perspective, that is the parent that should have the FSA username and password. The other parent does not need to provide any financial information and does not need a username and password as you go through the financial aid process. That does not mean that the other parent can't be involved in potentially setting up payment plans or being part of the student loan process or borrowing a parent loan on behalf of the student. It just means that their information doesn't need to be included on the FAFSA form. I'd also like to just discuss a situation in which biological mom and biological dad are divorced or separated. And let's just say in this particular example, that student lives with biological mom more than 50% of the time. And so biological mom needs to be included on the FAFSA form. And biological mom is remarried to a step parent. In that case, both the biological parent and the step parent need to be included on the FAFSA. So you would include both demographic and financial information for both the biological parent and the step parent. And I know that's often confusing for families because they often say, well, step parent isn't required to help fund any of the educational expenses. And I totally understand that. However, the U.S. Department of Education guidelines require that the step parent be included in the household financial information. So that's just something to keep in mind. Of course, I've talked a lot about biological parents, but adoptive parents are treated the same way as biological parents. So you would follow the same logic and the same steps that I mentioned above. The kind of only difference to what I mentioned above is if the student has a legal guardian, so not a legally adoptive parent, but someone other than their biological parent that has been appointed by the state to be their legal guardian, a grandparent, an aunt and uncle, a family friend, whoever that may be. In that case, the only person that needs to be included on the FAFSA form is actually the student's information. So no parental information is included. This is one of the important things that I'm going to say this evening, which is if you're not sure who to include on the FAFSA form, we know that, this is not all of the family circumstance scenarios that might exist. If you're not sure who to include, ask us. We're happy to help you with that. What we don't want you to do is not include somebody that needs to be included, have to add them later on in the process and have that impact the amount of financial aid that the student is receiving. So we'd rather get this right at the beginning. So always ask us questions. We're here to help answer those questions for you. Once the FAFSA is completed, you are going to receive, or the student is going to receive a copy of their student aid report. The student aid report is going to be a breakdown of all of the information that has been included on the FAFSA form, and the student can review that to make sure that there haven't been any errors. It will let them know if there maybe is some additional information that needs to be provided, but most importantly, it will include in there the student's expected family contribution. And so I'd like to discuss a little bit about what the expected family contribution is and how institutions use that to help determine how much financial aid a student should receive. So the EFC is calculated based on a federal formula. So the institutions have nothing to do with it. It allows every college and university to evaluate students on the same basis and on the same criteria, and allows us pretty much to compare student A to student B in terms of their need level. The EFC ranges from 0 to 900,999, so there is a wide range within there. Pretty much, if a student has a 0 expected family contribution, it does not mean that they don't pay anything to attend college. It simply means that they're demonstrating the highest need level possible and should receive a maximum amount of financial aid. A student who is on the other end of 900,999 is demonstrating absolutely no financial need and would then not be eligible for any need-based financial aid. The EFC is going to be the same at every college and university because it's a result of your FAFSA form and based off of the federal formula. And so what's going to be different at each institution is the availability of financial aid, whether it be institutional, state, or federal financial aid, as well as fluctuating university costs. So every institution is going to have a different level of cost for students, but that EFC is going to be exactly the same. So again, just don't be confused and think that this is the amount that you're going to pay to attend college. It is simply just a need index that institutions are using. Once you've completed the FAFSA form and you've been admitted to the institution, you should receive a copy of your financial aid award letter. At the University of Hartford, we will mail you a copy of your financial aid award letter in hard copy. Generally speaking, our first round of financial aid award letters go out in December. So we're getting ready to send our first batch of financial aid award letters for students who have been admitted to the university and whose FAFSA has arrived. Your award letter will include the maximum amount of financial aid for which you are eligible from both an institutional, federal, and state perspective. So we will review every student for all three of those financial aid options. I'd like to discuss cost of attendance just a little bit, not in terms of actual dollars, but I'd like to talk to you about it in kind of a big picture format. So generally speaking, when I'm speaking with families about costs, I tell them to look at the big picture. And so what I mean by that is that every institution is required to publish on their website what we call a full cost of attendance. And that full cost of attendance includes both billed costs and not billed costs. When we talk about billed costs, we're talking about direct costs, so costs that are paid directly to the college or the university. Generally speaking, that includes tuition fees, room, and board if the student is living on campus. But also included in that total cost of attendance are what we call not billed costs or indirect costs. So these are other educationally related expenses, and they're estimates of what those expenses might look like based on the institution's research and based on kind of the area. And so let me give you an example of one of those indirect costs. A good example of that is transportation. So if you live in Connecticut and you're going to be going to school in California, your transportation costs are going to be high, but you're not paying those directly to the institution. If you're living in Connecticut and going to school in Connecticut, then your transportation costs are likely to be pretty low. So again, just an example, but the institution is required to publish that full amount on their website. What really matters is what we call net price. So net price is any of those published costs minus any financial aid offered to the student. And that's really what you should be looking at as you're going through the college search process and you're making your final decisions. The Office of Student Financial Aid at UHART is often talking to families about net price and helping families kind of sift through net price as they're making their final decisions prior to our May 1st tuition deposit deadline. So that's what really we're going to be counseling you on, is we're going to be talking about net price. So that doesn't mean that an institution, that every institution is going to be within every student's, range in terms of affordability. But what it does mean is that you don't necessarily need to eliminate an institution strictly based off of what their published costs may be. You should really take the financial aid process all the way through. One question I get a lot from families is, what if we don't think we're going to be eligible for any need-based financial aid? Should we even bother wasting our time completing the FAFSA form? And my answer to that is always yes, at least for the first year, always complete the FAFSA form. I mentioned earlier, it only takes about a half an hour to complete. Complete the FAFSA form, allow yourself to go through the full financial aid process so you know what your true net price is going to be at the end. There is no penalty to completing it, so you might as well go through the process, and you might be surprised about the availability of financial aid for your particular family. Sometimes families make assumptions about what they think they might be eligible for because they talked to their neighbor who wasn't eligible for any financial aid, but you really don't know until you go through the full process. So I always suggest families, especially at the University of Hartford, to go ahead and complete the FAFSA, at least in their first year. If years 2 through 4, you don't want to complete the FAFSA because you don't think it was worth the time, then that's perfectly fine. But always in the first year, complete the FAFSA form no matter what. One thing that I do like to also mention to families is every student is going to receive a copy of the college financing plan sheet from the University of Hartford when they receive their financial aid award letter. So I'd like to just point out a couple of key things on here. First and foremost, the blue arrow at the very top is pointing to your expected family contribution. Again, many families get that confused and think that that's what they will pay to attend the institution. So just keep that in mind. That's not what you will pay to attend the institution. That's simply that need index that I talked about earlier. The box just below that is the total cost of attendance to attend. It will include both direct and indirect costs. So again, the published cost, not necessarily the net price. The two boxes below that actually separate out scholarships and grants. So free money first, and tells you what your net cost will be. So that's total cost of attendance minus scholarships and grants. Again, keep in mind, part of that total cost of attendance are those indirect costs we talked about. And so those are not costs that are paid directly to the institution and are just the institution's estimates of what, of how much those might be. In addition to that, the college financing plan sheet will include both loan options and work opportunities for you. So basically, this is summarizing all of the information that I went through this evening with you in kind of one clean spot as you go through this. The yellow circle where it gives you your net cost is really giving you a breakdown of what your bottom line is going to be to attend the institution. And then in addition to that, you may borrow on loan opportunities and you may commit to working on campus to help fund that bottom line as well. So what's next? You've completed the FAFSA form, you've received a copy of your financial aid award letter, you've gone through the college financing plan sheet and you understand what your net price are. Just know that we may ask for additional documents. Only submit them to us if we ask for them. Only submit them to us if they're required. You don't need to send us any copies of your tax forms or anything like that. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to review that student aid report when it comes through, just to make sure that you haven't made any errors. And you can also confirm on there what institutions are receiving a copy of your FAFSA form. So just make sure you've included the University of Hartford school code on there. Once you've made your final decision, we do ask that you submit your tuition deposit and accept your financial aid awards by May 1st of your senior year. Attend orientation. The Office of Student Financial Aid will be at orientation. We always talk with families. We do lots of additional presentations. Ask lots of questions. Ask us the tough questions. Ask us questions about what it means to be a student loan borrower. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you through the process. I'd like to take a minute just to talk to you about applying for additional scholarships. So I've talked to you a lot about applying for need-based financial aid and completing the FAFSA form, but outside of the university or outside the individual institutions that you might be applying to, there are additional scholarship opportunities that are not affiliated at all with the FAFSA form. So different civic organizations, nonprofit groups, churches, maybe a parent's employer might have additional scholarship opportunities. Keep that in mind. That's something that you want to be applying for in your senior year. Don't wait until you've made a final decision on which institution you're going to be applying to begin applying for these additional scholarships. We usually say that those deadlines are generally early in the process. So I would say, January, February, March of your senior year, you should really be thinking about applying for these additional scholarships. Ask your school counseling office or your guidance office for help at your high school. Some high schools use Naviance, and I know that lots of school counseling offices will post local scholarships directly in Naviance. So if you're not checking that regularly, make sure that you do. But also the University of Hartford website does have a number of outside or additional scholarship search engines that students can use to help facilitate searching for these additional scholarship opportunities. So again, just another thing that you want to be considering as you're going through the financial aid process. Lastly, I'd like to just point out that the Office of Student Financial Aid at the University of Hartford does assign each student, both prospective students and students who have committed to attending the university, a financial aid counselor. You'll see them listed on the screen now. It is broken down by the school or college that the student is planning to pursue their degree in. We do have Patrice and Myra here with us this evening, but we also have Cassandra in our office and Jackie in our office. So Feel free to reach out to any one of them to talk further about the financial aid process, to ask the questions that you have, and to really develop a relationship with them. Let us get to know your financial situation so that we can help you through this process as best we can. We do also have Spanish-speaking financial aid counselors in our office as well, for those families who may be more comfortable speaking with a Spanish-speaking counselor. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the process. Again, we're here to help you. That was a lot of information in a really short amount of time. And I always say that as I go through any one of these presentations that I'm doing, whether it be to our prospective students or to students at our orientation program. I know that I can't answer every single question as I'm going through the presentation, and I know that you probably have lots of questions. So I am going to open up the Q&A right now. So please feel free to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screen now. But also listed on the screen is our main financial aid email address, as well as our website information and our phone number. Please feel free to reach out to us at any point and ask us any of the questions that you have, especially if they're private questions that you'd like to discuss in more depth. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my co-hosts and panelists this evening.